Welcome to the Body, Mind, and Soul podcast. Every Tuesday, we talk about everything to do with personal improvement and self-growth. My name is Yermaya Dharani, and I consider myself a serious student of personal achievement. I'm hoping to create a community of like-minded people who can help each other reach their potential. So let's get to it. All right, guys. So I want to thank you once again for joining in. I'm really excited about today's episode because what I'm going to be talking about is something that for me was such an eye-opener. And I truly believe that this concept that we're going to discuss today is a real game changer if you're able to grasp it. And if one was to really apply this concept in their life, it could change their life basically faster than anything else can. And what I want to talk about is the concept of what I call the inner stance. Okay, so what is a stance? All right, a stance is something that is defined in the dictionary as a way that a person stands, especially when deliberately adopted, such as in a sport or in a person's posture. Okay, so the people that are the most familiar with stances are people that do martial arts. They understand the power of a stance, right? And people that do sports, right? In order for them to execute their techniques, and do certain things physically, being in a certain stance prior to trying to do those things can be of tremendous benefit. And so that's something that people that do those kind of things learn right away. So what a person's inner stance is basically the internal posture that they may or may not have deliberately adopted. Okay, so if a person is not familiar with this concept, it's very likely that they're not consciously choosing their inner stances, right? So if we're not constantly choosing our inner stances, what that means is that we're sort of leaving it up to chance whether or not the stances that we're using are to our benefit or not. Okay, now people usually believe that positive thinking and goal setting are the two initial steps to personal achievement. Okay, they're both very, very important. I'm a firm believer in both of those things, but they're not the first two steps. If you ask me, they're a great second and third step, but the first step, if you ask me, if you want to make rapid change, is to understand this idea of the inner stance, your inner attitude. So without a proper inner attitude or mindset, nothing's ever going to get done. So you can be as positive as you want to be, but if your attitude towards taking action, is not good, then it's going to result in success or failure. That's all going to depend on your attitude. So their attitude towards taking action or the position that they're coming from is controlled by their inner posture. So if you understand who you are and where you're coming from at this time, then identifying where you want to go by setting goals is only going to accelerate the process, right, of successful life change. So like I said, step one is identifying your inner stance. Step two is setting goals, and doing the rest of it, being positive. When a person refers to him or herself by saying, "This is how I am," what they are really trying to say is that this is the inner stance that they have chosen. Okay? Like I said, a lot of people are not even aware that they actually have inner stances. They believe that, this is just how they are. Now, in what I consider, a groundbreaking masterpiece of personal development, leadership coach Dusan Dukic outlines the concept of an inner stance. So, even the term inner stance and much of what I know about an inner stance comes from this book that I read by him, which is called Straight Line Leadership, Living with Velocity and Power in Turbulent Times. And it is a tremendous read that I recommend to everybody out there. So, like I said, most people don't even know that they're operating from an inner stance. They just believe, listen, this is the way that I am. This is the way that it is. What they don't know is that they can see things in a different way. Okay? So if they looked at things from a different perspective, they'd also see things differently. So let me give you an example of this. Did you know that if you are an immigrant who recently immigrated to America, you are 4 times more likely to become a millionaire than somebody who was just born in North America? So how could that be? I mean, A person who immigrated here has no network. They don't understand how the system works. They may not even have the best communication skills. Employers are usually frowning on hiring somebody that just, immigrated here, is fresh off the boat, so to speak, And obviously, there's no real advantages that they have over somebody who is a citizen or a longtime resident of America. But the difference is in their perspective. See, someone who lives here has started to take everything that we have for granted. Whereas somebody who has just come here from another country, often a country that doesn't have the wealth that America has, looks around and sees nothing but opportunity. So that's why, America is called the land of opportunity. For some immigrants, they see it like the streets are paved with gold over here. But people who've been living here for a long time start to get a sense of entitlement. They become desensitized to the opportunities that exist to them. They stop being grateful for what they have. So this is why your inner stance is so important. It can change your beliefs, which can change your actions and can open up a lot of possibilities for you. So I know that this is a lot to take in, and I'm talking about concepts that are vague and general, but I want you to just hang in there with me for a little bit so that I can help explain this. See, for me, I woke up one day and I looked at my life and I saw some of the mistakes that I'd made, and then I decided that I'd had enough. I just wasn't going to live like this anymore. That's what I told myself. And at that moment, I adopted an extremely powerful inner stance that made me raise my standards. Now, I didn't do it consciously. I sort of did it unconsciously. I just decided that, listen, I'm going to, you know what? I can't keep living like this. And after making that decision, this inner stance got adopted, which was extremely beneficial for me, by the way. So I decided that failure was just not going to be an option for me, and that I was going to do whatever it took to start living the life that I knew I could be living. So I was able to do this because I'd become so disgusted with myself, and disgust is such a powerful emotion that it gave me the motivation to be able to make a shift. True power comes from being able to make a shift like that, even when you don't have the motivation. You shouldn't have to hit rock bottom before you make huge changes. We should be able to make those kind of changes before we hit that rock bottom. So a person makes a shift in an inner stance consciously with his choice, okay? Rather than unconsciously, because they kind of have put themselves in that position. So when one gets into the habit of doing this, it can truly be life-changing. So that's why identifying your inner stance is the first and most crucial step to making positive changes in your life. So who are you at this time? What I'm talking about is changing who you are at a fundamental level. In the moment, where are you coming from? How do you see things? How are you operating in life? And ultimately, who are you, right? And many people don't realize this, but we can change who it is that we are consciously by changing our inner stance, okay? So that's a bit of an introduction on what it is that I mean when I'm talking about the inner stance, but I want to get into it a little bit further, and I want to talk about what the possible benefits of changing your inner stance can be. So just hang tight. Right after this short break, we're going to get into that right away. All right, so what are the benefits, of being able to control our inner stance, our internal posture, our mental attitude, our state of mind? These words are all synonymous for what it is that I'm talking about. The things that you say, the things that you do or that you don't do, the way that you experience life, the way that others experience you are all to do with the inner stance that you choose. Most people never choose their inner stance consciously. So it's quite possible that the inner stance that they have does not serve them. The concept of an inner stance, like I mentioned, very, very familiar in sports, like baseball, tennis, basketball, and in martial arts. In martial arts, the stance that you choose is critical to how you defend attacks or how you launch your own attacks. Now, if you have a weak stance, you're not going to have the balance that's required to repel attacks or to launch your own attack successfully. The same is true about your inner stance. If it's weak, you're not going to be as effective as you can be. Athletes and business executives are more conscious of their inner attitude than most. This is because they're in an occupation where their compensation is directly related to their performance. Therefore, it's incredibly useful for them to understand the psychology behind being successful. They also have access to psychologists and coaches who can bring these ideas to their attention. But even salesmen, whose income is tied to their performance, they know how to change their mood. I mean, they could be in a terrible mood, but then when they're in front of a client, if they're a good salesman, they can change their mood in an instant. So that means that they have control over their inner stance as well, because they've learned how powerful it is. In fact, in many sports like baseball and tennis, athletes have certain rituals that they do before important activities. So a tennis player, has the same routine before every single serve. He puts himself into a state of mind, into a rhythm. A basketball player uses the same routine before shooting a free throw. These routines are going to help them to get into the right state of mind or the right inner posture. And they know that doing this serves them well. That's why they do it. They've been taught to do it by people that have already walked the path that they are currently going through, their coaches and their mentors. Now, a baseball player, they use their stance for batting, for example. And if they get into a slump, they know that they can change their stance into something that is better to get them out of that slump. So in the same way, we can shift from a disempowering stance to empowering stances if need be. And just like in martial arts or sports, you can always change your stance. You can literally be a different person at any moment. I'm talking about changing who you are at a fundamental level right now. Our inner stance is a mental posture that we take and that we can choose to change at any time. Changing your inner stance can change how you choose to live and how you choose to exist or operate in life. In the book, The 1 Minute Millionaire, which is written by Victor Hanson, they use an example of how one's attitude can change their beliefs. So the example that they gave is this. Imagine that you just received word that you've inherited $1 million. So you go to the lawyer's office to collect the money, but the lawyer tells you that there's one catch, that in order to get the money, you have to climb to the top of Mount Everest on your own with no helicopter. Now, would you do it for $1 million? I know I would. I'd do it. Climbing the mountain is something that most of us would never imagine ourselves doing. I have a slight fear of heights even. But given the right motivation or attitude about it can change the way that change the things that we're literally willing to do. And we'd be prepared to do things that we've never even dreamed of. And that's because motivation can trigger us to change our state. Just like what happened with me, I sort of got so disgusted with myself that I was like, no, I'm not going to live like this. And I was able to make changes, and those changes came from me changing my internal posture first. So think of it like this. Perhaps you work in sales, and one of the things that you hate to do is cold calling. So you say to yourself, oh, you know what? I can't cold call. That's not for me. You always have a hard time getting yourself to do it. You just refuse to do it. But if somebody put a gun to your head and said cold call or else, would you be able to do it? Oh, hell yeah, you'd be able to do it. You would do it without hesitation. Your internal posture or your stance about something shifts immediately if you're given the right incentive. But to effectively use our inner stance in life, we have to have wisdom and power. Wisdom refers to the ability to identify the inner stances that we're currently operating from. And then power means having the ability to shift our inner stances. And shifting our inner stances is done by choosing a new stance, basically. So we all have multiple inner stances. We don't just have the one stance. We have a stance for when we go to work. We have a stance for things that we think we do well. We have a stance for the things that we don't think that we do well. We have a stance for when we go home. You know, some of these stances are empowering, and some of them are disempowering. So people will oftentimes get very defensive about the notion that they can change their inner stance because they believe that this is just who they are. It's as if it's coded in their DNA, or that it's something that's permanent. But the best way to use your internal posture is to choose the one that benefits you the most by helping you achieve your goals in that moment, in that one activity that you're doing at that time. So ideally, you would be changing your inner stance multiple times during the day. So for example, if your goal is to go to work with focus, intensity, and be, incredibly effective, right? Then you would want to choose an inner stance that is all about focus and intensity. If your goal is to spend time with your family after a long day of work, then choose an inner stance that is loving, content, and caring. If you can control your inner stance depending on the situation, it's going to be incredibly powerful for you. So, one who's not even aware that they use inner stances they've been adopting postures unconsciously. So, but somebody who understands the importance of an inner stance can shift their stances depending on the situation that they're in at the time, which is obviously much better. So, just like a martial artist can shift into a more defensive stance from an offensive one, we can choose to change the way we operate in life to determine the actions that we're going to take. So I'm going to give you another example because, like I said, this is a very general and vague concept. It's very difficult for me to explain. It's much easier for me to try and get the point across if I'm able to give examples like this. So hopefully I'm able to do a good job of this. But here's an example, okay? Have you ever had like a deadline for a project? It was weeks away, okay? You thought that you've got so much time to do it and it's not something that you need to worry about right now. So then you just procrastinate, okay? And then next thing you know, you keep procrastinating. And now all of a sudden there's only a few days left, okay? Now you start panicking, okay? And then you really get serious and you put the work in and you complete the project on time because you had no other option to. Right? Why were you able to do that? Because you changed your inner stance. You went from I can do it later to I have to do it right now. That shift in mindset is something that you could have done at any time. You could have done it right at the beginning, the day that you received the project, but you didn't realize that you can control that shift. Instead you allowed life to kind of put you in a position where you had no choice but to make the shift to meet the deadline. So remember, you're not your inner stance. Your inner stance is a tool that you created, to help you. But if you no longer have control over it, then it might not be helping you. It could actually be harming you. So in order to understand, these inner stances, Dusan Dukic, the guy who wrote the book Straight Line Leadership, incredible book, he uses what he calls distinctions, okay? So these are like contrasts between inner stances to help us notice them, and an example of an inner stance, a distinction between two inner stances might be an inner stance that is, say, overwhelmed, So when you get into that mindset where you're just like, oh my God, there's so much to do. I'm overwhelmed, When you get into that mindset, instead of allowing yourself to sort of dwell on that and to go down that rabbit hole, you can choose to shift that inner stance into something like focused or committed. You can choose how it is that you see yourself. You can choose how it is that you see your situation in your life. Changing your mental posture is much more than positive thinking. Okay, I'm not asking you to go outside, look at the garden that's filled with weeds and say, there are no weeds, there are no weeds, there are no weeds. I'm asking you to change who you are at a fundamental level in this moment. Your state of mind can give you freedom and the ability to achieve your goals, or it can make you dysfunctional and slow you down. Now, a story was once told to me about a man who was a terribly dysfunctional alcoholic, okay? So he was abusive mentally and physically. He was a degenerate gambler and he neglected his family. Now, he had two sons, okay? And after he passed away, the two sons went on to live very, very different lives from each other. One of them ended up being just like his father, an alcoholic that was abusive. He was a degenerate gambler also, and when they asked him, how come you became this way? How come you ended up becoming like your father? He said, well, what else do you expect? Look at the way that I was raised. My father was an alcoholic, so of course I'm going to be one too. But the other son grew up completely differently, ended up becoming fabulously wealthy, had a great family, and was living a happy life. And when they asked him how he was able to do this, he replied, well, what else do you expect? After seeing the way that my father was and, the choices that he made, I decided to make the choice that I was never going to be like that I was going to live life differently. So the difference between these two was their inner stance. It's the same reason why two people are going to go into a seminar and one person's life is going to be changed forever and the other person's life is going to remain the same. Most people want to focus on their goals and where they're going, but not identifying your inner stance before you start trying to get somewhere can be a huge mistake, because it's your mindset that's going to define what it is that you're willing to do to accomplish your goals. If you have a mindset that is, I'm willing to do whatever it takes, then believe me, you're going to achieve your goals. But if you have a mindset that's, oh, you know what, I hope it's not too hard, the stuff that I have to do, then you might not achieve your goals. So being in an empowering state of mind is what's required to take action. And, those are the actions that are needed to get you to where you want to go. Now, our state of mind determines the actions that we're willing to take, and it's either our liberation or it's our prison. So I'm going to give you some examples, of weak inner stances, right? So inner stances where you're worrying too much, where you're blaming others, where you're trying instead of just doing, where you're wanting instead of creating. Some empowering mental postures are ones like this: commitment, focus, authenticity, growth, functioning from integrity. Mental states of mind can be useful to us in every setting. If I'm at work and I want to be very productive, I can adopt a state of mind where I'm focused or I'm hungry. Once I've done work and I come home to be with my family, I can adopt a state of mind that is relaxed and content. Changing our stances to suit our needs in the moment is the most effective way to get the most out of our life. And being in an ideal state for every situation is the goal. Okay, but the challenge is, how is it that we change our inner posture? And that's what I'm going to get into right after the short break. All right, so how do we do it, right? It's obviously important, but how do we change our inner stance? How do we change our inner attitude, our mental posture, our state of mind? So Sun Tzu wrote in The Art of War that in order to evade a trap, one must know first that it exists. So the first step to changing your inner stance is to be aware of the inner stance that you are currently operating from. Awareness is the first step to change. Now, the challenge is to remember that we can change our state when we need to. And this is where the awareness comes in. So, and you know what? This is not easy to do. I know it sounds simple, but it's not easy to do, but it can do it. And the more you start paying attention to this, the more you become aware of your inner stances, the more you're going to notice opportunities to shift. Now, oftentimes when we need to change our state of mind the most is when we're at emotional extremes, so that's when we have to try and remember that, okay, you know what mental state is going to serve me the best at this moment? Now, Anthony Robbins, who's a mentor of mine, Tony Robbins is a beast, has done a lot of work on this in his personal development audio program called Get the Edge, which I highly recommend to anybody out there. Tony Robbins believes that we have recipes that are kind of like combinations of ingredients that when we put them together result in certain states of mind. Now, changing these ingredients or this recipe is how we change our mental state. Now, the three things that we can change that will alter our state are our physiology, our focus, and our language. And he calls these three things, when they're combined, he calls these the inner triad. So let me give you an example of this. So if I told you to imagine somebody that was extremely depressed, now how would you describe that person? Right? Would they be drooping their head, or would they be holding their chin up, with their head up high? What would their posture be like? Would they be sort of slouching over, or would they be standing up, with an erect sort of a posture? What are their facial expressions going to be like? Are they frowning, or are they smiling? Are they grinning? And how do they breathe? Are they taking shallow breaths, or are they taking deep, strong breaths? Now now that we've imagined somebody that's depressed, they're probably slouching, they probably have bad posture, they're probably frowning, they're probably drooping their head, they're probably breathing shallow. Now let's try and imagine somebody who's full of life, vibrant, happy, filled with energy. How do you think they look? What do you think their posture is like? Are they going to be smiling, or are they going to be frowning? How are they going to be breathing? They're probably going to be the opposite of the depressed person. They're probably going to be standing up straight. They're probably going to have a smile on their face. They're probably going to be breathing deeply. They're going to be in a strong mental state. So this is the biggest key to changing our state of mind and our inner stance. The most important part of the inner triad is changing our physiology. Okay? Now, when we exercise, for example, it dramatically changes our physiology. We breathe differently. Oxygen circulates through our body. We get the blood flowing. Our heart rate increases. Our body releases endorphins. It makes us feel great. It changes our state of mind. This is one of the reasons why we love to exercise so much, because it can take us from a shitty state, to a state where we feel amazing. Now, it makes us feel different. And like I said, it can help us shift our state. So exercising is a perfect example of how making physical changes to our body can make changes to our mood and our state of mind as well. And so we don't need to go for like a 30-minute jog to change our state of mind, but that is an option. If you're ever in a really, really bad state of mind and you can't get out of it, go outside, take a walk for like an hour, take a 30-minute walk, take a 60-minute walk, and you'll notice that your mood is going to totally change. Whenever I'm in a situation where I really don't know what to do and I'm stressed out about something, I go for a walk by myself for an hour. And by the time I come back, I know exactly what it is that I'm going to do, as if by magic. Okay, now when it comes to our physiology, there's three things that can help us shift our state, okay? Number one is our breathing, okay? If we are breathing very, very shallow, or if we're holding our breath, a lot of people don't realize this, but people are not breathing. Sometimes, like say for example, if I ask somebody to go up and do a speech in front of a lot of people, they're going to tense up. Now, what is the first thing that happens when they tense up? They stop breathing. They don't realize it, but stopping breathing forces you to hold a lot of tension inside your body. Start breathing, breathe deeply, take deep breaths, and then the next thing that's going to help us shift our state when it comes to our physiology is our posture, okay? Having a strong posture where we're standing up straight is going to make a big difference. And then, of course, our facial expressions, So this is an example that Tony Robbins made us go through, but I want you to try it for yourself. Stand up straight, or sit up completely straight, okay, with a powerful stance, and then grin from ear to ear. The biggest grin that you can possibly, you're just grinning, okay? And then start breathing fully, okay? And now that you've done that, you're standing up straight, you're grinning, you're breathing fully. Now try and be depressed, okay? Try and be depressed. You're gonna find that it's not gonna be easy to be depressed when your physiology is signaling to you that you should be happy. See, you're making some sort of a dish, you've got a recipe, and the ingredients that you're putting in are ingredients to produce a certain type of dish. If I'm putting in ingredients to make pasta, I'm not going to end up with rice at the end of the day. It's the same idea when it comes to your physiology. If your physiology is a strong, empowering physiology, it's going to be very difficult for that to result in a disempowering state for you. Okay? Now, the second most powerful way to change our state or our inner attitude is to change what we're focusing on. Okay? If we're thinking negatively, it's going to disempower us. So, what we focus on grows. Making up what we think about to the inner stance, what we think about with our inner stance is, and what we desire is going to dramatically assist us in sort of making a shift like that. So here's another example. Imagine if you're at home with your family after a long day at work and you want to spend some quality time with your loved ones. Okay, so try this out. First, make sure that you're relaxed. Okay, relax your shoulders, relax your face. Okay, take slow, deep breaths and put a slight smile on your face, and then start thinking about how much you love your family. Now that right there is a recipe for changing your state into a mood that is loving and content. Okay. Now the final part of the inner triad is the language that we use, specifically the language that we use when we talk to ourselves. People don't realize that the way that we talk to ourselves has so much influence on how we feel. If something bad happens to me and I say to myself, oh my goodness, I'm screwed, it's going to make me feel a certain way. But if after the same thing happens, I say to myself, you know what, this didn't work out exactly the way that I wanted it to, that's going to give me a different feeling. Control the way that you speak to yourself to alter your mental posture. Now, if you take each of these things can change your state. Every single one of them. Your physiology can change your state. Your focus can change your state. How you speak to yourself can change your state. But when all three of them are aligned, when you're combining all three of them and putting all three of them into play at the same time, you're going to rapidly and easily change your inner posture into whatever is the most useful for you at that time. So I know that I make it sound simple, but I know that it's not easy to do this. Like I said, the first step is awareness of our inner stances. And this is often the hardest step because we may not even remember that we can change our state when we need to the most. But starting to become aware of this is going to help you notice opportunities to shift that are beneficial to you. So keep trying it. This is something that you've got to practice. This is something that you've got to keep working on. It's like a muscle that the more you use, the stronger it gets. And then next thing you know, after you've been practicing it for a while, you're going to realize that you're getting really good at this. Oftentimes when we're in emotional states that are overwhelming us, we're not thinking logically. And that's when it's the most important time for us to actually shift our state. And that's where the challenge lies. When we're emotional, it's like we're intoxicated by our emotions at that time. And when we're intoxicated, because we're not thinking clearly, we might not remember to shift our mental posture. But by doing it again and again, it's going to end up becoming habit to you, so that when you're at that time when you need to shift, you're going to remember it. And like I said, the more that we practice, the better that we're going to basically be at it. So don't underestimate the power of this, people. Give it a shot for yourself. Read, Straight Line Leadership by Dusan Dukic, and leave me a message. Let me know what you think. Try it out for yourself and let me know what your experience is. I want to thank you once again, for tuning in, and I really hope that you guys were able to get some value out of this. I know that I had a lot of fun producing this content for you guys. Thank you so much. Until next time. All right, guys, I want to thank you so much for listening to the Body, Mind, and Soul podcast. Please join us next Tuesday for a new episode. Also, listen, if you were able to get any value out of this at all, please leave us a review, like, subscribe, comment wherever you hear this podcast, because I'm going to really try and put it out there. Talk to you guys next time.